right, folks. Hope you enjoyed your lunches. If you can find your way back to your seats, we're going to go ahead and kick off our afternoon panel. So hope you're all enjoying some time to chat with colleagues. Really nice to see so many of you in the same room today. And looking forward to kind of bringing some of the talks from this morning together a bit, and then thinking about the bigger picture of adaptive management here. It's been mentioned a lot. So the structure of our session here today, we're going to have brief presentations from our panelists here, who I'll introduce in a moment. And really kudos to them for cramming a lot of information into a very short time. And we really are going to try to leave as much time as possible at the end for questions to really make this an interactive panel. What we're really going to be focused on today now is building on a lot of the great science that folks have been presenting today, and really thinking about, okay, in the context of an actively managed site, what actually happens? How does that determine the ability to adaptively manage a site? Across a program, what are some of those relationships that lead to the effective implementation of adaptive management? And at a bigger scale, what are some of the longer term planning perspectives that we can bring in to help us better understand the system? So I want to back up just a moment, though. We've heard a lot about adaptive management today, but we haven't sort of had a definition up here. This is just one definition, but it's effectively the reason why I have a job and why I'm up here talking to you, because the Delta Plan, which many of you are probably familiar with, specifically calls out and requires adaptive management. And specifically science-based adaptive management. Here's the relevant code sections. I won't read all of this to you, but science-based, transparent, and formal are three of the key things. And of course, ecosystem restoration is specifically called out for this. And I think it's good to note some of the key points here as well. So thinking about a framework for flexible decision making, I think we've heard a lot of talks today point to that need for being somewhat flexible as we gain new information from the science process, how we translate that into management, but also this data acquisition, monitoring, and evaluation to help improve things as we go along. So this has been a real theme of the day today, and this is really exciting. I mean, it's so neat to see you all in the same room here, because I started working in the Delta in my current position in 2018. And at that time, I think Decker Island was maybe breached the month that I started my job. And that, simultaneously feels like forever ago and not that long ago. And those conversations then was, well, we're really just going to need a lot more information. So that's been in the back of my mind. And I feel like today, it's just a very concrete example of bringing that information to bear. So just thanks to all of you who have presented so far, and I know all of you in the room today have also been involved one way or another with developing this data and information that we're building on. So just kudos to you all. Without lots of hard work out there, long hours, I know for many of you. So just really want to appreciate that. So I wanted to frame, because I think I'm legally obligated to show the adaptive management wheel. So, so some of you might be familiar with this, but this is the sort of shinier version of the adaptive management wheel from the Delta Plan. And so what I wanted to do today to start off was to zoom out, take a 30,000 foot look at where we're at today. So where are we on the adaptive management wheel from a big picture perspective, and how did we get here? And so we've heard a bit about this. So Stacy covered a lot of these points in her talk. So when we think about step one, defining the problem here, the problem is largely related to the decline of native fish species that Stacy talked about with the pelagic organism decline. So that sort of sets our baseline. This was the big problem that that these fish restoration projects in particular were designed to address. From there, establishing goals and objectives. This goes back to the initial creation of the fish restoration program through the fish restoration program agreement, which specified, of course, these specific which specified the pathway to achieving the specific acreages laid out in the biological opinions for salmon and smelt. So this kind of sets our goals and objectives for the system. Step two. Step three, real credit to Stacy, Rosie, and Dave Contreras, who edited this really extensive suite of conceptual models that helped us specifies step 3 here of modeling linkages between objectives and proposed actions. This really provides the scientific basis for how, where, and why these projects are being done. And then, of course, the information that we've really started getting today is sort of this steps 4 through 6 of selecting the actions. A set of these different project pictures here, that design as well as the monitoring. So designing both your project itself and how you're going to monitor it through the development of adaptive management plans. So every project that's been highlighted today has an associated adaptive management plan. And these are all archived on our covered actions website at the Delta Stewardship Council. So if you're curious to see how some of these projects that you're hearing about today have translated sort of their goals and objectives formally through an adaptive management process, it's actually very well documented. And then, of course, that gets us to where we are today. And so, again, like I said, just very excited to be at this step on a system level here. So today's symposium is really looking at steps 7 and 8. So taking this analysis, synthesis, and evaluation that you all are involved with and moving that into communicating the current understanding, getting on the same page so we can identify what information is needed, what future information we need, and generally where we're going in the system. And then step 9, I think, is what we're all working towards here today as well. So this step towards adaptation. And so we've talked about this a bit already, and we're really going to get into some of the nitty-gritty of this on the panel today. But how do we take, knowing that it might be really challenging to actually change a restoration project that's already been implemented, how can we best use the information we have to make changes either to future projects or understand where we do have the power to manipulate? So that's another theme that's come up throughout the talks today. And I really like the way that Matt Young put it when, he said, paraphrasing, but we don't know everything, but we do know enough to inform management. So really exciting time, I think, in the system that we do have this data coming off of projects. So the way that we structured our panel today was to think about adaptive management across scales. A question that we get a lot is thinking about, I can't make any modifications to my project. There's not the funding to do that. So how am I supposed to do adaptive management? Which is a fair question. And so what we're really hoping to bring out today is to sort of show how we start at the project level. And I think that's often the ground floor for all the data that's being collected to inform subsequent steps. So we're going to use the Dutch Slough project as our project example today. And on my x-axis there, you have your time frame. So on the project scale, that's relatively short time frame, although Dutch Slough is 25 years in the making, so I don't know. I don't know how appropriate short per se is, but you'll see why I'm saying that in a moment. And then as you move up, both on the time frame scale on your x-axis as well as your spatial scale on your y-axis, you move to the programmatic level. So at the programmatic level, you have this interaction of site-level adaptive management that's ideally informing each other, but although we'll also talk about some of the ins and outs of actually making that work. And we're going to hear from the Fish Restoration Program team from DWR about this implementation of adaptive management at the program level. And then lastly, we're going to hear about how the Delta Plan itself, which I mentioned is our guiding document at the Delta Stewardship Council, how the Delta Plan itself is adaptively managed to make sure that it's flexible in guiding the future of restoration in the system at a large scale. So with that, I want to move us on to our panel. And I can't remember if I introduced myself. So just in case, I was like, I'm going to be really on time and just jump right into it. I'm Dylan Chappell. I am an environmental program manager in the Delta Science program of the Adaptive Management Unit. So really happy to have our panel here today. So I'd like to introduce first Katie Bandy and Molly Farrell from the Department of Water Resources Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives, who are going to talk about the Dutch Slough Wetland Restoration Project.
All righty. Thanks so much, Dylan. All right. So I'm Katie Bandy, program manager for the Dutch Slough Restoration Project. I have a background in aquatic ecology, fish and wildlife biology and regulatory permitting. I've been involved with this project since about 2018.
I'm Molly Farrell, and I am leading the adaptive management sort of program at Dutch Slough.
Alrighty, let's get into it. So yeah, I'm trying to give you some background on the project and the adaptive management planning. So the Dutch Slough project is considered a habitat enhancement, a programmatic habitat enhancement project for the Delta Levees program. They have a mandate for a net habitat improvement. This means this is not a mitigation project, kind of unique. We've got a lot of projects that are from the fish restoration program. Like Dylan said, long time in the making. It was first conceptualized in the 90s. And phase one, which is the 2 parcels on the west side of this map, broke ground in 2018, right when I got really ingrained in the project, and we breached those 2 parcels in 2021. The phase 2, the parcel on the right there, is in planning currently. So the site was always designed to be a living laboratory. It was designed under an adaptive management framework from the get-go. Shortly after it was conceptualized, a group of leading scientists were formed to develop the adaptive management plan, this adaptive management working group. They noticed that the site really lent itself to being a living laboratory as far as producing, granted, not a high level of replicates, but a way to do replication within the project itself. The adaptive management planning spanned a long time and it produced a beautiful kind of gold standard of adaptive management plan. But our challenge at our program is that this not being a mitigation project, we were left without dedicated funding to implement this plan. Only a little challenge.
Okay, so I managed the revegetation at Dutch Slough, and before that we breached the site for 2 years, we contracted River Partners to fully plant the site. So it is, all the marshes were planted with tules, and the uplands were planted with riparian vegetation. And the goals of that were to stabilize soils, combat invasives, which apparently doesn't work, and then accelerate restoration. Can you hit next, please? Yeah. And I also run a long-term habitat management program that initiated through a concept that we submitted up to executive back in 2018. That was when DWR kind of stopped doing projects because we didn't have long-term management funding for our projects, and so it was a problem. And we kind of won the lottery because it was serendipitous. We had somebody come in who understood the need for that type of work, and this program was funded. And so I have been building this program since 2018. And just wanted to say that habitats, just in general, California habitats, we used to build them and walk away, and we can't do that. They do require some level of maintenance, even if they have a natural process like tidal or flooding. It's just this habitat, a landscape's been managed for tens of thousands of years. Okay, so this is just my program, the Long-Term Habitat Management Program. I'm highlighting the researchers that I've been able to support currently at Dutch Slough for pre- and post-breach monitoring. So we have USGS, Kramer Fish Sciences, UC Davis doing a large-scale wildlife study, and UC Berkeley is doing carbon flux studies. And we also have some other folks in the room who are doing research as well. It's just not funded through this program. As part of just doing the construction and having all these researchers out at the site, we needed to have a coordination group with all the researchers to let them know what was happening during construction. And it was such a successful group that now we just meet and talk about research and what's going on. And it's a really good ground for sharing ideas and collaborating and cross-pollinating, and also especially between agency and science. So next, please. So I just wanted to say the big takeaway at Dutch Slough, really, because we flooded, we didn't breach the site, we planted the whole site. What's is now clearly showing is that Dutch Slough is in the top 1% globally for carbon sequestration. And that is really unique to a lot of tidal marsh projects that tend to rely on natural recruitment, that have a 10-year lag time on average before they start sequestering carbon. It's also showing that even though it's the youngest habitat site of our program in the Delta Levees program, out of 3,000 plus acres, make that 7,000 now. It's the highest, most diverse in terms of terrestrial taxa that we have quantified currently. So we attribute that to habitat heterogeneity and the complexity of the site. And really just wanted to say how important long-term data sets are, that when you just take a quick snapshot, it doesn't tell you kind of what's happening over the long term, and you really need those trends, especially for doing adaptive management.
All right, so we are trying our best to use the data that has been collected pre-breach, post-breach, and mostly relying on this beautiful relationship we've created with our research partners to help us take some real-time input into our next phase of our project. It kind of came up as a question earlier on, like how are we able to incorporate that? Because there is some constraints, like you get money for these projects and you have to spend it in a certain amount of time. And is that enough time for the information we got from phase 1 to apply to phase 2? And you kind of do the best you can. And one thing I kind of want to leave you with is these projects, they cause sticker shock. We've heard it quite a few times in this room. But put the question out of what's the cost if we don't do these projects? This particular example, this site was slated for 4,500, big housing development, 4,500 houses that would have been built below sea level, with the threat of climate change and sea level rise right at the door. And
just wanted to say real quick that Dutch Slough in particular is such an important site for DWR as a diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we need to incorporate those kinds of activities. So our researchers are really key in helping us bring students out, local students, to get to know their local ecosystems.
Yep. All righty, on to the next.
All right. Thank you, Katie and Molly. Really great illustration of some of the multi-benefit dimensions, I think, that go beyond a lot of the aquatic research that we've seen presented today. But just a reminder that, these benefits really do go far beyond, just the aquatic habitat specifically. There's a number of benefits across scales. And so with that, I will bring up next Dan Reardon, who is going to talk about the DWR Fish Restoration Program.
It's the green button here. Yep. All right, so I'm going to take a little bit different approach to adaptive management and talk about it from the program and project delivery scale. I'm the program manager overseeing the tidal restoration for ITP and BIOP compliance for the department. So this is, for us, it's all mitigation. As most of you or all of you know, the original BIOPs came out in 2008 and 2009, along with a 2009 ITP from CDFW for longfin smelt. And we had a 10-year deadline starting in 2008. So we were supposed to have 8,000 acres delivered by 2018. We all know that hasn't happened. I'm going to tell you a little bit on the reasons why and why I think it's okay. So in 2010, for the first couple years, DWR was getting staffed up. So we created the Fish Restoration Program section. Fast forward to 2012, and really actually back in 2010, we entered into an agreement with CDFW. So our program really is a collaborative approach with CDFW, specifically Region 3. We have implementers and the monitors. Stacy's here representing that section today, and the rest of you folks. So like I said, this really is truly a collaborative. We work very closely with CDFW to deliver these projects from design, land management, monitoring, and even site selection. So every step of the way we're working with CDFW. So the program was staffed up in 2010. In 2012, after a couple years of working on it, we delivered the implementation strategy. So that was the plan that really kind of demonstrated to everybody what we were going to use as kind of a recipe book on how we're going to deliver 8,000 acres. Fast forward to 2018 was when we finally delivered our first two projects. That was Decker Island and Flyway Farms. So we're already 10 years in, and I just wanted everybody to really think about, from a kind of a programmatic and maybe global or at least national scale, delivering 8,000 acres is a huge lift. I'm not saying that to make an excuse for the reason DWR hasn't gotten it done, but this isn't a typical mitigation bank where you have several hundred acres, 150, even 500 acres where you have to develop, and that's all you focus on. We had to staff up a program and really come up with a way to deliver those 8,000 acres. So as most of you probably know, in 2019, we had a new BIOP come out from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and in 2020, there was a new ITP from CDFW that added on an additional about 400 acres. So we're looking at 8,400 acres being delivered. We've really had to adapt, I think, kind of everybody's expectations, including our own. Is it reasonable to think that we can, in some time frame, 10 years, 15, 20 years, deliver this many acres and do a good job of it? I did just want to highlight that we do have 11 projects in our portfolio. 8 of those have been constructed, and hopefully this map up here is clear enough. I don't know if these slides are going to be sent out, but I think you guys have seen these slides all throughout the day anyway. All right, so first up, I'm kind of going to look at three different ways of how we've had to adapt. First up has been kind of adapting how we deliver the construction of these projects. So initially, we thought we can do design, bid, build, which is very familiar to those of us at DWR, particularly if you're an engineer. You pick a site, you design it, and then you go and you put a contract out for bid and get it built. We have 4 sites that fit that bill. We very quickly realized, well, maybe not that quickly, but over a couple of years, we realized that there's no way we're going to be able to get 8,000 acres all for design, bid, build, where our staff and CDFW staff is doing the work with consultants to design these projects. So we have moved into we added in the contracting. So we have RFPs, NCBs, which is a non-competitive bid. We have 5 projects that fit in those, in kind of the contracted project realm. A few other special contracts in there that I'm probably going to get some of the terminology wrong, and that's really with our contract folks. But so, we added in just kind of a contracting for our program. A very new delivery mechanism for us is CMGC, which is Construction Management General Contractor. We're doing that in Chips Island, which is in the marsh. That's where it's a new authority that DWR has, and Chips Island is the first project that's actually going through that process. The idea there is you bring on a construction contractor who can go through the design of that project with you from the very beginning and help you kind of identify some of the problems that you might have as you're designing and looking on site and what's actually going to be possible out there. And then finally, kind of circling all back to what my predecessor, Dennis McEwen, wanted us to do for Prospect Island is using a reclamation district to actually do the construction of a project. So Prospect Island is actually going to be in that delivery mechanism. We've also had to adapt how we do land management. When this program first started, we were looking kind of furiously within the department to try to manage the one project that we had, which was Prospect Island. So looking at different divisions who can help us mow levees, levee crowns, and do levee repairs and interact with the locals on the ground. I won't read off all this slide, but I just want to highlight there's a lot of different ways that we have kind of adapted and looked at land management. So now we have contracts with RCDs. We have a contract with Suisun Resource Conservation District, and they help us manage our sites in the marsh, reclamation districts and whatnot, and then a number of different contracts. We have contract with the California Conservation Corps, and several others that I can't remember, but we have probably 15 to 20 different contracts just in our section that some of those contracts are all for a little bit or a lot of it used for land management. I did want to highlight also, actually, it's going to be my next slide here. So this is an excerpt from our adaptive management and monitoring plans. This is one that Stacy Sherman and her folks have really developed through their time in this program. And it just takes a look at when we have a site constructed, what is going to trigger an adaptive management action. So again, this is another slide I won't read off of, but this is kind of how we look at it. Once the site's been built, if we're going to have to make a change, we need to run it through something and have kind of some standardized way to be able to know that we need to make some sort of take some excuse me, some adaptive management action. So Decker Island is a good example. We have a big tree in one of the breaches, and we need to move that tree at some point. So there's all sorts of things like that are highlighted in these tables here. And finally, I wanted to talk about adaptation and management expectations. So not adaptive management, but how we as managers and delivering these projects are really thinking about delivering all of these acres. First of all, who needs to adapt to that? It's really everybody. I could have just said everybody, but it truly is. It's the project proponents, regulatory agencies, NGOs, people on the ground, your neighbors. We all have to realize that we have this huge restoration requirement, and we all, at the end of the day, the delta is going to change. It's not just going to stay in farming, or it's not just going to be habitat. A little bit more in the weeds here. Excuse me. How do we kind of adapt our expectations? Something that we've learned and probably seems like common sense, but meet with all of your project partners regularly, early, and often. So regulators, locals on the ground, reclamation districts, RCDs. And then finally, this is, as Molly and Katie pointed out, and everybody really, that cost is something that we really have to kind of change our expectations on. When you look at it, our program to date has spent probably over $200 million, and we have 8 projects of 11 constructed. Our average cost for delivering a restoration project at the creditable acre, the cost per credible acre is around $35,000 over our per credible acre for our 11 projects. If you look at doing that as for a mitigation bank, anywhere from $50 to $100, maybe over $100,000 per acre. So this really isn't something that we could have just said, hey, let's just go buy a bunch of mitigation credits. First of all, those 8,000 acres don't exist for Delta Smelt. And second of all, it's a heck of a lot more expensive to go to a mitigation bank to do that. So this is something I want everybody to think about. It's a big sticker shock, to me included, but that's just the price of doing business and mitigating for the State Water Project and really everything that we're doing in the estuary. And that's all I have.
Right, great, thank you, Dan. So yeah, great example of just how these projects that this data is being generated from, how they actually get there. There's so many different steps on the back end. And just to echo Dan, that communication and collaboration is really key to making that work. So thanks a lot for that case study. I'm now going to bring up another Dan, Dan Constable from the Delta Stewardship Council, who is going to talk about adaptive management in the context of the Delta Plan.
Okay, thank you and good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dan Constable. I'm an environmental program manager in the planning division at the Delta Stewardship Council, and we're going to give you a really high level overview in about 4 or 5 minutes. So it's going to be high level. So first off, as Dylan gave a short overview of this, our managing document for the Delta is called the Delta Plan. This came about as required by the 2009 Delta Reform Act, which also formed the Delta Council. Why I'm highlighting that today is within the Delta Plan, there's 17 regulatory policies, and one of them requires adaptive management for projects. We call them covered actions that meet certain criteria, and many, if not all, ecosystem projects we've been talking about today meet that criteria. So they require some form of adaptive management that goes along with them. Another important point to mention here is that the Delta Plan itself requires adaptive management. It calls for adaptive management, and the quote here at the bottom, paraphrasing here, is saying that the Delta plan itself needs to be adaptively managed. And as you are all project managers, you might be implementing a project, you do adaptive management for your project. The Delta Stewardship Council, the council itself, is the body that implements adaptive management for the Delta plan. Yet again, we're going to show you this wheel here, the adaptive management wheel, and I wanted to walk through a few examples here. We're going to go through what updating the Delta plan looks like and how adaptive management can work at a plan level. One of the reasons we had to do this for the Delta plan is, if you've been around the system for a while, you remember the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, or BDCP. That was envisioned as coming into the Delta plan and addressing both conveyance and ecosystem restoration at scale, about 100,000 acres. That went away, it pivoted to other projects, including Eco-Restore on the ecosystem side. But as soon as that happened, it created this issue for us, is that we no longer had a single comprehensive vision for what restoration should look like in the estuary, in the Delta. And so that brings us to the first step here. There was no longer ecosystem goals, arguably, at a high level from the Delta plan's perspective. So I want to start there, and I want to walk through each of these other steps here, or most of them. And that actually brings up another point, is that adaptive management looks different for everyone. We might skip around a little here. Not all the processes or steps apply to your project, perhaps, and at a planning level, that's true as well. So a little context around the amendment. So we amended Chapter 4 of the Delta Plan in June of last year. Again, this came about because we had to solve that step one, is what is our objective? What is the problem here? We had a gap. There wasn't this vision. What this lays out at a high level is it lays out a vision of 60 to 80,000 acres of restoration. That might look like sticker shock on an acre basis, but I also want to note that this, a lot of this has been done, not a lot, but quite a bit. And Dr. Dylan Chappell has done some work on this that we'll look at in a minute. This is from a 2007 baseline, so we're not talking about BDCP scale that we need an additional 80,000 acres, but that's the overall vision up to that. The amendment includes 5 core strategies, which are listed here, all focused around ecosystem components and functions. And then there's a number of other considerations, so being a good neighbor, respecting neighboring land uses, and more of a focus on tribal involvement and social benefits. So as was mentioned a minute ago by Molly, these projects can have DEI benefits. There can be benefits to nearby communities. This was based on consolidating 14 plans, various projects that have been out there. So there's a few examples up here on the screen, Central Valley Joint Venture, for example, and others. We didn't make up the numbers. We tried to aggregate and take numbers that were already out there and downscale them to the Delta. Okay, so this is work that Dylan has done to try and answer the question, once you get along, where are we? How are we making progress along this wheel, and what more do we need to do? Dylan went out and looked at what projects have been constructed on the landscape, what has been planned, and therefore what is the gap. An important point to highlight here is about 70% of what's needed on the landscape in our vision has yet to be planned for. So depending on you look at it, that's like, oh my gosh, or that's a great opportunity, because these are all places where you can learn from past projects. That's what has worked well, what has not worked as well, plan your project, and incorporate adaptive management into them from the very beginning, from a planning phase. So there's a great opportunity here, and I'm hopeful that future restoration is just going to get better and better. And then lastly, as we do look to the future, another part that fits into adaptive management, the planning level, is how to adapt for climate change. So adding one more stressor onto the landscape, we've seen the climate projections for the system. Past projects that may have taken a certain approach to having a tidal restoration project in a certain area may not work as well where we thought they were going to work in the future. And so we have to have some flexibility and the ability to monitor old sites for adaptation and also plan for future sites, how they are going to adapt. And so the council's undertaking a climate change initiative. We call it Delta Adapts, that incorporates a number of factors, but it also brings in these adaptive management components of synthesizing what is out there, trying to bring in new climate science and plan for the future under this. Other things to highlight under here is that all the projects that we heard about today and many others that were not delved into detail, we can learn from those. So again, we know some have worked very well, some maybe did not work as well and had to be modified over time. We can learn from all those experiences and bring it into the future. Okay, and we'll end there.
All right, great. Thank you, Dan. So round of applause for our presenters. Great. And so we do have about 10 minutes for questions. Not quite as much as we were hoping, but still a decent amount of time. So I think also just want to encourage you all to really think about the work that you're all doing today in this longer time frame continuum. You know, we don't have projects by 2050 if we don't do the data collection and implementation that we're doing now. So yeah, there's long life for all this stuff.
My question is, I think for Dan. So I'm sort of trying to think about how long do you really need from the time you know that you have to build a project till you need the information we're in this room to try to get you?
I wish I could defer that to somebody else. Yeah. Katie's saying yesterday. Gosh, I mean, that is really a tough one for me to answer. You know, we have 11 projects that are going to be built by 2026, by early 2026, all completed. In an ideal world, we would have known exactly what we needed before we designed any of them. I don't know. I might even almost look to Stacy if you have a response to that, or I don't have to put you on the spot.
I almost asked because I knew there wouldn't be an easy answer, but I guess one thing I was trying to draw attention to is how important it is for us to kind of come together and get this stuff done soon. Because in addition to that extra 450 some odd acres you said got added, there was the 5,000 I heard referenced, and if the Delta plan goes through, there's going to be substantially more. So, but thank you for trying. I knew it would be tough.
Well, if you're thinking about the VAs, I think we have an ideal opportunity right now. I mean, we're all here today talking about, looking at the data that we have, talking about the data that we need. So I think we kind of need to continue doing what we're doing. I don't know when the VAs and those first projects are really going to get implemented. I feel like when they do get implemented, they say, thou shalt start doing stuff. We are all in that position right now, and we do have enough information to say, it's kind of, rethink our design and, look at how our modeling has predicted what we thought was going to happen on these first restoration sites. I feel like Stacy and you and your folks have a lot of data that we can use, and not just you guys, but everybody. It's hard to predict what you should need, but I think we're in the spot now to be able to use all the information that you all have been gathering, all of us, to really implement those projects as they come through the VAs and any other restoration projects we have, I think pretty effectively. So kind of an ambiguous answer, but.
So I don't know who I'm asking, actually. It could be anybody up there, anybody in the room. But when thinking about, actively, adaptively managing existing or planned restoration projects, is there anybody who isn't in this room that needs to be part of this conversation for us to move things forward? I mean, who do we need to bring in? Regulators, permitting people, like who's missing? Who do we have to convince?
That seems like a loaded question. Do you have and I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but I feel like we'll have everybody here. I would say I feel like we have everybody in the room that we need to. I don't know how the rest of you all think about it, but I don't know. Do you have an idea? Because I feel like we're the implementers, we're the managers, the regulators, the funding source with the state water contractors, at least on the DWR side of things for my program. We're all here right now.
That's great. That's the answer I was hoping to get.
I do have a comment, though. Yeah. I do feel like sometimes these conversations are really closed, and we're missing the really important players. That's the legislative people, because I feel like they could benefit from hearing some of these conversations. So we could get funding to do adaptive management.
I was just going to throw in there, too, that I agree that we have everybody locally that we needed. But Isa mentioned, there are other river systems on the West Coast that we can gain knowledge from that are doing restoration. So Not that they need to be in the room per se, but I could see us learning from some of those efforts going on, mostly on the Columbia and then up in the Nisqually.
All right, we're going to go to Ramona and then Rosie. Oh, wait, you have an answer? Is that what you're saying?
I was going to respond to Dan.
Okay, let me go to Rosie. Sorry.
Hey, Darcy,
All right, psych, Rosie first.
Sorry about that. I just wanted to, saying that we don't have the legislators in the room, and legislators don't necessarily want to sit through a day-long symposium about science, but I wanted to put a plug for, at the end, we are going to be putting together a white paper with the results of today kind of distilled down, and the breakout rooms you're going next to is where you'll get the chance to give some input into what goes into that white paper. So hopefully we can communicate to any people who aren't in the room today.
Thanks, Rosie. And just a follow-up question here from online, and maybe you can define what you mean by this. As somebody who works for the water management community, aren't we missing water managers? So maybe online you can reply to that. Ramona.
Yeah, and I think just thinking about when you're trying to take these ideas to implementation, sometimes the permitting agencies or your neighbors who might say, that's a nice idea, but under my regulation, that's not permitted. And so getting them involved early if you want to do something so they understand your project. And then also you might understand whether it's feasible to get done. Unfortunately, a lot of projects big ideas get tailored when facing permitting realities.
Yeah, Ramona, and I'll also just mention, because it hasn't been mentioned yet today, that we do now, with the Suisun Wetland Restoration Project, have the first example of the Cutting the Green Tape SERP, Statutory Exemption for Restoration Projects, process being used for a project in the Delta. So I think that's an encouraging, hopefully, development towards that end.
So I've got a question. It's kind of tied to, I guess, follow up to what Matt was asking about. What, relative to adaptive management, how are the biological opinions? I think they have like a 5-year planning horizon, at least ours does for, say, state parks, boating, and waterways. But within the context of what we've been talking about here today, does that 5-year horizon allow a plug and play with what we just heard from you all? Is there an ability within that 5-year program for our federal partners to say, well, we hear what you're saying, and yes, we'll allow you to adapt in order to still meet the provisions of the BIOP?
I'm kind of the eternal optimist. I think yes. I think, well, for us, for the Fish and Wildlife Service BIOP, we have until 2030 to complete the 8,000 acres. The extra 400 is a CDFW requirement. That's 2026. So I will say that we are working, I feel like, in lockstep with CDFW now as we're coming to the completion of at least our program. So I feel like we do have that. I wanted to add on a little bit of response to your question. I think the public probably isn't in the room. We all are part of the public. We do engage with them. So again, I think we are engaging with everybody we need to, but I don't think they're actually in the room.
Yeah, quick question. I think depending on who you are, if you're a manager, you sort of love the term adaptive management. And if you're a scientist, maybe you're sort of enamored with manipulative field experiment. I'm wondering if they can be the same thing. For example, if you build a new restoration site, say Burroughs, you include a few channels that have weirs that you can sort of maybe not manage, but experimentally sort of weir off or weir on, so to speak. And so that infrastructure is built in advance, doesn't require a bunch of permitting after the fact, and that allows you to do an adaptive management experiment and also a sort of scientific field experiment as well. So I guess my question is, can that be done? Has something like that been proposed in the past?
Okay. Yeah, short answer, yes, that sounds great. I mean, I don't know the particulars of that, but we already are working on Burroughs in that context. We had a short side conversation before I came up here about just not a weir structure. That's an interesting new idea to propose, but there is flexibility within this project, especially for Dutch Slough. It being in the category of enhancement project does provide us flexibility in designing for the purpose of study, like in that way. So I'd say, most definitely we should talk more about some more details about that.
Hi, kind of building off that same question. I'm wondering how the science so far being done at Dutch Slough is informing the design process at Burroughs and what insights are being incorporated into the design.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say, I'd say it's more on a fine scale, refining some details of the design, more than like a big change in design of what was originally envisioned there. I mean, it could be as small as we were doing surveys before we had breached, and we had a heck of a time getting our researchers access because we kind of didn't think about incorporating a way to access the channels before we breach it, things like that. Or trying to protect some more sensitive areas on site. There's a lot of these relic dune habitats on Dutch that could be really culturally sensitive. Let's work around those as much as possible in our design. Any existing habitat, we're kind of expanding our riparian corridors as much as we can. We've seen such benefit from the heterogeneity of the site, just trying to kind of expand and build on that. And more as it comes up. But those are a few examples that just came off of my head. While I might have more.
Just real quick, we did have a meeting. We used our research working group to actually meet with us to talk about the conceptual design with the engineer and see what they thought and if they had ideas. It's also difficult because a lot of the fish research is still unanalyzed. They've collected some data. But so there's nothing super conclusive for them to be saying you have to, we should really try this. But there was definitely ideas, and we're definitely moving in that direction.
All right. I don't see any other questions online or in the room, and I know we're hitting the breakout room time. But whoever made the question about water managers, I'm still trying to understand the question. Does that mean we're not at the table, or we should be? I don't quite understand what you mean by that. So please follow up. And then I'm going to pass it to Rosie for some instructions for the breakout groups.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks to the panel. Really great information. Thanks to all the morning presenters. Now we're transitioning from talking at you to having you talk at us. As I mentioned, we want to develop a white paper, a really brief summary of what we've come up with today, and a list of what the community thinks are the highest priority science actions to inform adaptive management and the highest priority adaptive management actions that we should be investigating on these sites. So we're going to split up into breakout rooms. The breakout rooms will be themed around the topics from this morning's presentation. So we're going to have one on restoration design, one on vegetation, one on water quality, one on invertebrates, and one on fish. When you registered, you were asked to choose which room was of most interest. It seemed like it was relatively balanced, so if you remember what you signed up for, go for that. If you want to jump ship and hang out with the people talking about invertebrates, you're more than welcome to. So what's going to happen is the lead presenters from this morning's talk are going to be orchestrating each breakout room. If you're interested in fish, you're going to meet Matt back there in that corner of the room. If you're interested in invertebrates, you can meet me over here. If you're interested in water quality or primary production, you're going to meet Emma over there. If you're interested in restoration, design, and modeling, you're going to meet Dave Ayers, and you guys are going to go upstairs to the Yorick room. If you're interested in vegetation, you're going to meet Eddie. By by the door and go upstairs to the mower room. If you're online, thank you so much for sticking with us. You're not going to be able to participate in the breakout discussion, but we really do want you to go to menti.com, enter that code, and fill out the questions. The breakout rooms are going to be all talking about the main questions. What new scientific studies do we need to inform adaptive management? And what are the major adaptive management issues faced by restoration sites, and how do we overcome them? You can put your information in the Menti. If you're in the room, we also would like you to do the little online survey, just in case we don't capture all of your great ideas during the breakout. You can do that in the breakout or during the final wrap-up session. If you're online, you get an hour or so break. We would love for you to come back and watch the wrap-up. That'll start at 3 o'clock, or 3:10 rather. Breakout rooms, when I release you, you'll have about an hour and 15 minutes until 3 o'clock. Then get a little break, and we'll meet back here at 3:10. Any questions? Nitra.
Are the breakout rooms going to report on what they kind of came up with?
Yes, the final wrap-up session will involve a member of each breakout room reporting what they discussed, and we'll look through some of the results from the Menti poll, and Louise Conrad will give us kind of a synthesis of what we learned today. All right? Great. Find your leaders and, get started. Thank you all.